we have to protect privacy and we have to protect free speech and free expression online. And it's under attack from both ends, or not both ends of the political spectrum. It's really under attack from like the Democrats and the Republicans here in America and in places like Australia too. It's the same moral panic. I was suspended very shortly after I joined Threads for talking about revenge porn, which of course had the word porn and flags internal moderation systems, whatever. Like, we want to protect people, but we don't want to end up creating these systems where you're scared to say the wrong word because you might get banned or something.
Today on Revolution.Social, we're thrilled to welcome Taylor Lorenz, one of the most influential voices in technology and internet culture. Now working independently on UserMag, Taylor has become the definitive chronicler of how social media has shaped our society, from TikTok trends to the creator economy. Her reporting has consistently broken ground on stories about online communities, influencer culture. It's kind of ridiculous. I have no idea how you do it because you find so many trends and understand how they're working. Taylor's worked at the mainstream media, at the New York Times, the Washington Post, the Atlantic, but she's also worked independently as a blogger, as a creator, and has been able to step back and forth between these worlds. So I am very excited to finally meet you and talk to you. Welcome, Taylor.
Thanks for having me.
One of the things that I think is so fascinating about your work and about the way that you're portraying it is you've really been able to find a way to understand what's going on in this incredibly complicated emerging world of social media, understand the trends and explain it to people, make sense of it. I'm wondering if you could talk about sort of how you came to cover this space, how you came to learn what is going on these platforms.
Yeah, as you mentioned, I started as a blogger, which I think at this point really dates me because I'm a millennial. And so, like a lot of millennials, graduated into the recession. I was just sort of working at a lot of like temp jobs, retail jobs. And then this girl at one of my temp jobs introduced me to Tumblr, and it just changed my entire life overnight. I got obsessed with Tumblr. I got popular on Tumblr. I did start some Blogspot blogs at that time too, but basically just got really obsessed with sort of online culture, and I started to write about it. I noticed that the traditional media would write these really stupid, condescending pieces about the internet and about technology that were really negative and really kind of tisk, or like moral panic. And so I thought, well, I'm pretty online. I'm a young person. I have this website that lets me write whatever I want. I'll write my own articles. And so that just got me into blogging and doing internet stuff. And I've always felt, the main sort of thesis of a lot of my writing is just that like labor on the internet is real labor. Content creation is like real work. I know it doesn't seem as radical now, but definitely 15 years ago, people had this sort of negative view of writing on the internet or content on the internet. I remember even when I got hired at The Atlantic, I told them, like, I don't care about the magazine. I only want to write for the website. That's the only thing that matters to me. Like, the internet is everything. And as you mentioned, I love writing about like users. I've always written about tech from the user side because I think it's sort of interesting how people take different tech products and use them to build community or reach people or, share about themselves.
So one of the things I think is so fascinating is so many people who cover tech or write about it focus on the money, the business deals, the personalities, the companies, which is winning and which isn't winning. And that feels so backwards to me because that's not what it's about. One of the things that I've talked to many people about is Twitter never innovated anything. Like, all Twitter did was create this sort of space where you could send these text messages, and we figured out how to do that. But then all the company did was make the space, cultivate the space, bring people into it, and then look at how they used it. Biz Stone hated the @reply. He kept trying to get the @reply killed because he's like, this is ugly. You can just write someone's name. But the users made it. And so I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit or some examples of the way in which user culture collectively in this sort of participatory network has innovated.
Yeah. Well, one reason I love writing about social products specifically is because there good social products are basically co-created with their users. Because like you mentioned, like you'll roll out a feature, but then users will sort of take it and use it in an interesting way and come up with like brand new a brand new use case for something that you never thought of. And I love stories like that. And I love digging into like weird user behavior phenomenon. And so this was especially true with the early social web because everybody was sort of just trying to like figure it out and figure out kind of like how this stuff worked. I give the example in my book as well, but YouTube started as a dating site. You know, it was this dating platform where they thought people would upload like, I guess, dating, videos to find dates. And that's not how people started to use it. People started to use it to like archive media and all this stuff, and then they evolved. And you also see, I give there's products that don't evolve with their users, and they generally fail because you can't like fight what people want for that long. Twitter is another one you mentioned. I mean, Instagram was also very sort of co-created with its users. They did not want influencers on there, and I talk about sort of how it became this like powerful marketing engine, almost despite the wishes of Instagram's founders. So yeah, I think it's just so interesting because people want to connect with each other. They want to build communities or they want to express themselves. And I think when you give them certain tools, yes, you can incentivize certain behaviors, but no matter what, people will sort of like forge their own path. And so I try to find those examples, especially young people.
Yeah, young people always do it. You mentioned Tumblr, and I have two teenage kids, and they are being wonderfully online queer teenagers. They're 15 and 18 now, and they love Tumblr. They like a couple years ago, they came to me and they're like, "Dad, have you seen this thing, Tumblr? It's so amazing."
Oh my God, this warms my heart to hear.
And
uh,
they're on Tumblr every day, and it's so funny because then I log back into my Tumblr account, which I hadn't used since 2012,
wow.
when the youngest one was 2 years old,
Oh my
and
gosh.
they're using it the same way. They're exploring the same things. Like a culture has moved on, but the need for that space and that kind of space still exists as each generation comes up. And what you sort of mentioned was the way in which people connect, the way in which they create together, the way in which they like, that's the exciting part. And then somehow we ended up with this massive monetization scene. And
Yeah.
there's a conflict between the power dynamics of the economic incentives. Creators want to make money, platforms want to make money, but the people who are there, sometimes they want to be entertained and sometimes they want to connect.
hmm Yeah, I know. I think a lot of times when people talk about like the good days of the internet or before everything got bad or whatever, like there's this sort of I guess communal acceptance that like pre 2015 internet was like good. And of course it wasn't universally good. We had Gamergate and other things, but I think most people weren't exposed to the toxicity of the web. And also the web was just not like, and these social platforms were not monetized to the extent that they are now. And so, I think a lot of people yearn for that internet that was like sort of pre-monetization, right? Where like it wasn't overrun with ads and marketing schemes and things like that. But unfortunately, I think because there's just so much like capitalist like pressure on these companies, and these are massive publicly, we have such a like I would say a duopoly. I guess kind of like Twitter's around there too, but like it's so much of Google and Meta control so much of our ecosystem, and I guess TikTok too. I don't know. We have a few big companies basically that control a lot of our sort of social experience online, and those companies are incredibly profit driven. And I think that is ultimately to the detriment of the user base because the decisions that are being made about the products they're made to optimize like profit over the user experience. So I think that's led to a bad situation.
Yeah, no, it's this sort of failure of the commons. I was talking to David Bollier, who is the author of a bunch of books on the commons, and we were talking about the evolution of social media and the way in which podcasting ended up staying as sort of open, independent commons. There's no company that controls podcasting.
Spotify's trying to destroy that, but yes.
Spotify is trying to, but hopefully they don't succeed. And there are lots of ways in which you can interact separately from that. You know, Jack famously says that Twitter should have been a protocol and not a platform. And in 2008, we actually built federated Twitter as part of Twitter.
Really?
You could send a tweet on Twitter and follow someone on Google's Jaiku, and they would see it there, and you could follow back. And we had it all working in a prototype form. But as Twitter scaled, then the tech fell apart. And then there was no economic incentive to keep that openness there. You know, there were people like, well, if you just keep everybody on this platform, then we'll get more ads. And eventually in 2012, they did that thing where they shut down the third-party apps, and they said, you know, Twitter bought all the third-party apps, and they brought it inside, and they said, we need this for advertising. Advertising is our business model. And Jack at least says that was the thing that eventually killed Twitter, was this, we've decided advertising is our business model. And yet, if you look at what you wrote about Vine, they didn't provide a business model. And the lack of a business model is part of what killed Vine.
I mean, here's the reality. Creators, like people do need a way to make money on the internet to survive. Creative people have always needed a way to like make money and survive. This is why I think platforms like Etsy or others, although Etsy's overrun with AI slop and garbage now, but like, you know, there are platforms that sort of like provide people ways to make money on the internet, and that's very valuable. I think, you know, Vine came at this interesting time because it was right when that shift was happening. It was right when people started to understand, like, okay, wait, online attention itself is valuable, and I'm providing this value to this company that I like. There's like this sort of asymmetry here, and I deserve sort of some kind of compensation, whether directly or indirectly. So I think that was, yeah, it was a huge shame that they sort of didn't understand that dynamic. But I think anytime you have a non-commercial space, well, first of all, people are going to try and come commercialize it. And also just like, you're not going to get a certain type of content creator. Like you're not going to get, well, you're just going to get mostly average users posting for fun. Anyone that sort of starts to amass any sort of attention is going to recognize the value of that attention and want to monetize it. I mean, even in Blue Sky now, they're monetizing. There's monetization, or there's SpawnCon. Like a lot of people that run those big lists are now running SpawnCon, sponsored content. Because they recognize, oh, I run this really popular big Blue Sky Twitter list. That is attention. Attention is valuable. I can monetize it. And yeah, it's making the web worse, sort of. I don't blame those users for doing it. I think the thing that's making the web worse as a whole is like the big companies that are doing it.
The labor of constructing lists and doing curation or creating content, that is real work. And the idea that it shouldn't be compensated, or it doesn't exist in an economic system where there is value going around is kind of crazy. And the obvious part about that is most of that work is done by women.
Yeah.
Like some of the creators are there, some of the men creators are there, but like a huge amount of the curation work, a huge amount of the community building work, a huge amount of the moderation work, a huge amount of all the list building work, it's done by women. And therefore, by definition, we devalue it.
Yeah, I think that's been true for the whole content creator economy, unfortunately, because it's such a female-driven industry.
And because the larger portion of the audience themselves are women, it's considered less interesting, less valuable, even if it is larger. You know, there's whole large social networks that, you know, that aren't male dominated, and it's almost like they never appear in the news. They never get coverage whatsoever. One thing I think is fascinating is the way in which creators are trying to use different platforms and use backup accounts and use links to take an audience that they have generated through their content, through algorithms, through community development from one platform to another. And we saw that with people using Twitter to drive the growth of Clubhouse. But the one that people don't realize as much is, Yoel Roth told me that a huge percentage of all outbound links from Twitter go to onlyfans.com. Somewhere between 30 and 40% before Elon took over of all traffic leaving Twitter was to OnlyFans. And so it's not like you can see these platforms as independent little things because they're all interdependent. And so I was wondering if you could talk about that phenomenon and the way in which creators within this system are trying to protect themselves.
Yeah, I think that one lesson from the era of Vine, which was the first major platform to sort of like atrophy and all these creators sort of like hopped off. Like in the mid 2010s, around 2015, creators just started to realize that they couldn't be like dependent on one platform. They had to diversify. And so you started to see a lot more creators pushing and sort of hedging their bets and pushing audiences to follow them across multiple apps. That way, if one app changes its algorithm, or if you get banned on one app, or if one app, cuts off traffic to other apps like Elon Musk has done with Substack, et cetera, you've hedged yourself and you're not solely dependent. Because if you are solely dependent on just one platform, it's just a huge liability. And each one of these platforms, as creators have sought more autonomy, has cracked down further and further and made it harder and harder and harder for you to port your audience over. Famously, if you say, the word YouTube on TikTok, like your video is not going to get any views because they don't want people going off. None of these companies want to make it easy to port your audience elsewhere. And so, I mean, a lot of creators have embraced, Linktree, for instance, like they'll have these, or Beacons, they have these, websites that they sort of put in their bio that have the list of all their different social platforms. But, ultimately creators don't have ownership. And I know Substack loves to claim they do, but they don't have much ownership over there either, especially now that that platform's pushing its app. I think all of these platforms ultimately just want to keep users within their little walled gardens.
The irony is that between 2005 and 2011, there was a lot of cooperation on the platforms about openness. There were all these standards that let you get all of your users and look them up and connect them and find your user on this other platform and move your data. And there was a moment at which, for a few years, everybody was like, we're all open and we're part of this big community, and people were doing mashups. And, there was a product called Yahoo Pipes that I worked on briefly that literally let you like visually program, take this data from my one account to put it into my other account and connect it. And then that all went away when they decided that they wanted to control these spaces. And it almost went away at the moment that creators started realizing that they had value.
Yeah, because I think, I think creators started to realize that they actually were responsible for a lot more value than the platforms had them believe initially. I will say YouTube has always recognized the values of creators in the sense like they've always cut them in on the ad revenue. They've built undeniably the most sustainable monetization scheme in all of social media, even though it's still not that sustainable for most people. But yeah, I mean, I think that as I've written about before, like these platforms often have very hostile relationships with their creators. And I think this is why you've seen these platforms embrace algorithmic feeds so heavily too, because they don't want creators to have too much control. If a creator suddenly has this massive distribution on your platform, now you're beholden to them. And so now if you control the algorithm, you can downrank their content, you can sort of de-influence them like from within, you can sort of harm that. And it's been a struggle for creators. I mean, the far right actually recognized this very early because they felt like they never got a fair shake on a lot of these mainstream platforms, mainly because they were pushing hate and disinformation. So that, yeah, like the platforms rightfully were deplatforming some of these people, but they very early, like they leaned into sort of developing their own audiences. And so now we're seeing mainstream, especially since 2020, more mainstream creators embrace those same tactics that far-right extremists started using even back in the early 2010s of just trying to basically develop as much of a direct relationship with your audience as possible.
Before I was working on Odeo and Twitter, I was a media activist. I was involved in the Seattle 1999 WTO protests, and I started this network called Indie Media, and we set up basically media labs in 180 cities all over the world. And so I spent 3 years just traveling around setting up computer labs where we would train people how to make video, how to make photos, how to edit articles, how to set up your own low power FM radio station. We did pirate television station. And the entire idea was that people should, make their own media. And I went down and worked with the Zapatistas in Mexico and the cocoa growers in Bolivia and, indigenous groups in India. I went to all over the world doing this work. And the idea was, let's give them the tools to create their own media. But there was no social media platform at the time. We live stream a protest in 1999 in Seattle from the streets, but it was a laptop and a Sony Handycam and this weird data network, and you had to use real networks to stream. It was really hard. And I, at the time, thought, well, maybe if I go get a job at a VC-backed company and work in San Francisco, and I'm from the Bay Area, so I'll be able to take these ideas we've been doing for the activists, and then we could apply them to the whole world. And that worked. I mean, we made the things much more easily done, but we lost that control of your own media at the same time. Like, we democratized the media, but we lost the infrastructure. And it's fascinating to hear your coming along talking about how creators are continuing to see that need to own their own means of communication.
Yeah, because I think that they just do not want anybody, like, especially if you're a content creator, the whole thing is to not have gatekeepers theoretically. And unfortunately, these tech platforms are now the new gatekeepers, and they are exerting more and more control over speech, over who gets a platform, over who can monetize, how they can monetize. And again, in some cases that's good, but overwhelmingly, I would say it's not good. I think that we need a much more democratized system. And I think we need more open platforms and tools that people can use to reach audiences. And I do think that it's a little scary that the only people that are able to sort of innovate in that space are the far right, because on the left, they have no resources to do any of it. I talk to a lot of left-leaning content creators, and they just have no ability to replicate what the right is doing in terms of just reaching people directly.
Well, and because the right figured out that they need to have foundations, they need to have funders that are funding and creating this stuff. In the early 2000s, I was a big believer that all we needed to do was provide easy, democratic, open tools for everyone. And of course, the left is more culturally creative and more innovative, and there are more of us. So if we just build this open platform, we will solve all sorts of problems, and people will come together. And, you had the Arab Spring, you had Me Too, you have Black Lives Matter, you have a bunch of movements that have grown up on that. But the sad part was, I was like, oh shit, these right-wing folks can do this work too.
And what's been really scary, and I've been trying to cover a lot more, especially on my YouTube channel, is that especially in America, the Democrats and the Republicans are completely aligned on one thing, maybe other things too, but specifically censoring speech online. And so you mentioned things like Black Lives Matter, Arab Spring, all these Me Too things. What Democrat and Republican lawmakers both want to ensure none of that ever happens again on the internet. That is one thing that they both feel, and that's why you have people like Richard Blumenthal working with people like Marsha Blackburn to push these really, really restrictive censorship laws, essentially things like the Kids Online Safety Act, this terrible, they always name it like Protecting Kids Act or whatever. That's not what any of these laws do, but it's scary. And I've talked to staffers on the Hill, and I've talked to people that are like lobbyists around these efforts. The Heritage Foundation is involved with a lot of it. And yeah, they want to go back to a world where the government controls what the information ecosystem and there's institutional control and institutional power. And they don't want people challenging power. And look at how they've responded to the conversation about Palestine, for instance. They literally banned TikTok over that.
Because they didn't like what people were saying on TikTok.
Yes, exactly.
They didn't like that people had been able to use this platform to manage it. And it's not just in the US. I live here in New Zealand, and there are people who are inspired by Jonathan Haidt, who are like, we need to ban minors from social media. And to ban minors from social media means that we all need to register and verify who it is that is using social media. I know that this is something you feel really passionate about. I wonder if you could talk about the importance of, not just for minors, but for everybody, that these things don't get passed.
Yes, I could rant about this for an hour, so please stop me if I go on too long. But it is terrifying that we are seeing, our civil liberties just dismantled online in real time, and it's all under the guise of protecting child safety. You mentioned Jonathan Haidt, this pseudoscience nonsense man who wrote a book about campus cancel culture, has absolutely no experience talking about, anything that he's writing about now. He's pushing this moral panic about kids and technology, claiming that it's social media and it's the internet that's destroying kids. He's pushed this fringe theory that, it's the internet that's turning your kids trans. And that's what these lawmakers truly believe. Like Marsha Blackburn, when she said why the Kids Online Safety Act needs to pass, she said was to protect children from the transgender in society. So they're using anti-LGBTQ panic to mainstream these really bad laws, whether it's the Kids Online Safety Act or revoking Section 230, which is a law that protects our sort of free speech online here in America, and other things. Age verification, as you mentioned, is such a problem because you can't just verify kids' ages. To do age verification, you need to essentially tie everyone's offline identity to their online behavior and remove anonymity from the internet. And that's terrifying. We should never accept that. We need to protect anonymous speech for journalists, for activists, and for everyone. We don't want to mandate that these companies, it's ironic too, because the government spent the past decade complaining that all these companies collect too much data, and now they're mandating that they collect more data. And I'll just tell you really quickly an anecdote of Neera Tanden, who was a Biden admin advisor, had this event. There was this event at the White House last summer where they invited hundreds of content creators to the White House to have some kind of content creator day for the Democrats. Neera Tanden got on stage and said to all these content creators, don't you wish you could unmask every troll? Raise your hand if you want to remove anonymity from the internet. And all these stupid content creators, of course, raise their hand. They don't know what they're doing. And I thought that was the most chilling thing I've ever seen in my life as a reporter, because here is the government explicitly saying, we want to unmask you. And by the way, look at what they're doing with that data. Look at whether it's ICE, immigration, crackdowns on speech, I think that we have to protect privacy and we have to protect free speech and free expression online. And it's under attack from both ends, or not both ends of the political spectrum. It's really under attack from the Democrats and the Republicans here in America and in places like Australia too. It's the same moral panic. It's being sold in Europe, in Australia. It's across the entire world, basically, by these reactionary forces. And we know, by the way, the Heritage Foundation, this far-right organization, has said that they have come out and said that they will use these laws to censor reproductive justice content, to censor content, any LGBTQ content. We're seeing censorship of, pro-Palestinian activists. I just think no matter where you stand on the political spectrum, we have to protect people's right to express themselves online and have a privacy online too.
Yeah, absolutely. And then combine that with what we're seeing, where they're using the border to check people's social media, and not just say that you check your social media, but they won't believe you if you're like, I don't have social media. So now you have to create social media,
yes,
in order to get a visa, and you have to have it comply with stuff. And now they're saying we want to tie everyone's social media accounts to their government identity. And we're going to lose the very essence of what makes a pluralistic democracy work.
Yes. It's terrifying. It's so terrifying. And I know it's so hard to get people to care about tech policy, but I really think this is the biggest threat to our freedom that I've seen in my lifetime, truly, just this assault on civil liberties and speech. And maybe this is very American to be free speech or whatever, because I know in Europe, they've never had free speech in the same way that we have in certain ways. But I think when it comes to the online world, just we want to protect free expression. And this idea too that the internet, quote unquote, or social media is, what's leading to kids' mental health crises or whatever. All of that it's debunked pseudoscience nonsense. These are the same people that claimed that, video games were destroying society or comic books were poisoning children's minds. Like, that's the type of nonsense that these people are selling. And we've seen these moral panics over and over again, and they're just not based in reality.
And the moral panic comes every time there's a new medium of communication introduced. There was a moral panic about the decline of young women's intellect because they were reading novels.
Right. It's absurd. My favorite example like that, well, I love this account, The Pessimist Archive on Twitter, and they just document basically moral panics over time about technology. And like the Walkman is like, like controlling your brain or whatever. But there is this example in when landline telephones were being rolled out widely where some man had committed, like tried to attempted murder or something, like his neighbor. And because he got so mad on a telephone call, and the media blamed the telephone companies and told them that they need to solve this problem because people were getting enraged, on telephone calls. And what are you going to do about that? And I just think it's important to remember that these are tools, and yes, we can do things to hold these specific, if Facebook is doing something wrong, like, yes, we want to hold them accountable, but we don't want to pass a bunch of really bad laws that ultimately like harm all of our right to free expression and dismantle our entire system of privacy because of some nonsense that some boomer is pushing.
No, it's absolutely true. This idea that we should control it all, and the best way to control it all is to then empower governments and a few large platforms to be in control. We have this system of laws of CSAM, but also all of the other proposals that essentially make it impossible for new open alternatives to exist. A decentralized social media protocol that users can run themselves couldn't exist in Australia because there's no authority to verify the age of the users because you can set it up and run it yourself. And so the effect is sort of a kind of regulatory capture around whoever is here now gets to be here forever in the future. And that's, one of my big fears is that we end up in a world that, Mark Zuckerberg owns all of our means of communication. Like every time there's something new, he buys it up or he creates it. Now, people went from Twitter to Threads, and, why should we trust him to run Threads in a responsible way when we have 20 years of him not running things in a careful way?
100%. And we just don't want that kind of centralized control. We don't want a bunch of executives that are worried about like the next quarter's profits or whatever. Like, none of these companies are interested in protecting civil liberties and free speech. That's not their goal. Their goal is to maximize profit. And if they have to, censor tons of reproductive justice activists in Texas to stay on the good side of the Republicans in Congress or whatever, or comply with some other authoritarian government, like, they're going to do it. And we've seen them do it. We've seen them do it all around the world. And X is doing it too, by the way, now. Mr. Free Speech Elon Musk is complying with these authoritarian regimes to censor speech. So it's very frustrating that these tech CEOs don't stand up for users and for our privacy. And I think that we just need to build as many systems free outside of that, like, ecosystem, that we can while we can. I think about like even just like the humble like web page. Like, imagine if the actual like web was introduced now, like the moral panic and the freakouts that would happen. Like, I think that we're like losing so much when through these moral panics. And again, that's not to say that some of these platforms don't deserve to be accountable, but they're almost less accountable when we make sure that they're the only ones that can stay in control.
Yeah, I've gotten very frustrated at people who are just like, we need them to behave better. We need Jack to make better decisions. We need Elon to make better decisions. We need Evan Spiegel or the TikTok team or Mark Zuckerberg or Adam Mosseri to make these guys to make better decisions, when we know the incentives and the structures around what they're doing, they could be better. Sarah Wynne Williams' book on careless people shows that the Meta and Facebook team didn't care as much as they could. Like, they really only cared about growth and power, but we can't trust them.
Yes. That's what they're always going to do. You can't ask a business to be benevolent and protect our rights. Frankly, the government should be protecting our rights, but the government is the one that wants to crack down on all of this. Again, the Democrats and Republicans together. And so I think I just think it's important to build tools, again, like outside that system, decentralized tools, and also lobby against these horrible, horrible, dangerous laws, no matter what country you're in.
In 2018, I went back and sat down with Jack at Twitter, and in 2017 and 2018, and there was two topics of conversation that came up. The first one was, of course, do you ban Donald Trump? And I hate Donald Trump, but my answer to him at the time was, no, I don't think you can ban Donald Trump because you don't control this company. It's controlled by a bunch of investors on Wall Street and a bunch of board members. And if you got rid of the thing that made you in the news every single day, then there'll be a shareholder revolt and they'll fire you. Like, the truth of the matter is, we think the CEO has all the power, but unless you had Zuckerberg like super voting shares, there's actually a set of market investors and advertisers and everybody else who has the power. And then that led to a conversation of, well, what do you do about it? And the thing I said was, well, we need to build a protocol. We need to build this more like the web, more like the internet, more like email or like podcasting, and figure out a way to get something like Twitter and the rest of the social media off of that. And Jack was excited about the idea in 2017 and 2018. And he went to the Twitter executives and they hated it.
I'm sure they did.
They're like, why would we give up this power and this control? And he's like, Twitter should invest in this. And the general counsel was like, no. And then he's like, well, I want to invest in it. And they're like, no, you can't invest in it. And so I got a little money from Biz because Biz didn't bother to ask whether or not he had permission. And we went off and did it, and we did work on it. And then slowly over time, Mike Masnick wrote his article about protocols, not platforms, and everything else. And eventually, Jack just said, fuck it. I'm going to fund Blue Sky. I'm going to fund this thing. And we didn't know what Blue Sky would be. We didn't know what it was going to be built. And we brought together a bunch of technologists who've been working on protocols, including Jay Graber and a bunch of other people from the Fediverse and all these different projects. And we spent quite a while just, okay, how would this work? How do we build this thing? And the most crucial element of it was not the technology decisions, but the decision that Blue Sky shouldn't be owned by Twitter. That somehow we managed to convince Twitter to give the money, but not take any ownership and not have any control. And it wasn't just some project within Twitter. And so we got Blue Sky as a funded platform that eventually was able to grow. And we finally got a woman CEO as the founder.
Yeah.
The first time, since Meg Hurahan helped found Blogger and Blogspot back in the late 1990s. That was the last time there had been a woman. Like, there's two.
That's crazy.
And it's just super fascinating for me what that is. And it's also, I think, I would love for you to talk about, what do creators need? What do people need in order to consider using these things and understanding why they exist? Because so many people see themselves as, well, I create it and I love the algorithms because the algorithms give me an audience and then I get the connection and everything else. And then once you've got that, you're hooked and stuck.
Yeah. Well, I do think that like any modern social platform needs to provide paths to revenue, like for users, like content creators, basically. Like if you want to monetize, a platform should make it so that you can monetize easily. And outside of their own system, like if there is a rev share thing like YouTube, that's great. But overall, I think like, Substack, I think, is moving away and towards more of a closed garden, but theoretically they were built on this idea of like helping people generate subscription revenue and more direct relationships with their audience. So I think that that's important because people need to be able to sustain themselves if you're going to like invest in a platform. And with Blue Sky, that's been one thing that I think people are just these list creators are starting to monetize, which is cool. But I do think that there's a lot of people there that have amassed audiences that are trying to figure out like, well, how do I make money on this? Because I am generating, I've cultivated this audience. Like, do I launch a subscription product? Do I start charging for things? Like, I mean, right now there's no ability to paywall certain posts, but I would love to see Blue Sky build in more monetization features just so that people would invest more in the platform. I think people aren't going to invest in a platform that they can't sustain a living on. And I think it would lead to some high quality stuff. It's just that, yeah, you don't want the platform itself like to become a Facebook where they're just trying to profit off everyone.
Yeah, I've had conversations with Jay and a bunch of the Blue Sky board and a bunch of the tech folks, and the question they have is, how do you introduce a monetization system that works, that doesn't leave them ultimately in a central point of power and control? Because they don't want to reproduce the same problems, and they want to provide a way in which you can do micropayments, and subscriptions and things like that. And yet they have built the architecture of their protocol in such a way that it really only works for the public content.
Mm-hmm.
Like
Yeah.
there's a reason there's no private accounts on Blue Sky. It's like,
Yeah.
you designed it in an open protocol, and unless you were thinking about how to make it private from the start, there's no way to make it private. It's so tricky the way the early decisions end up shaping these things.
Yeah. Yeah. I think they'll figure something out. I don't know. I mean, I think there are probably ways that they could build features that would help people make a living that wouldn't necessarily, but I don't know. Even just like helping people sort of promote their own work. I will say that like just the fact that it doesn't downrank links is huge. Because I mean, I raised recently something like $40,000 for Point of Pride, which is this organization that provides gender affirming care to trans youth. I shared that link all over across every single social platform that I have, including my newsletter. But Blue Sky, because links aren't downloaded, got far and away the most traction, and because of the community on Blue Sky for sure. But, anytime you share a link on like Threads or Twitter, you're getting nowhere. And people know this. This is why they screenshot everything and share it as an image. So I think that that's like just little things like that can actually end up like, because it's not going to downrank your Patreon link. You know what I mean? Already that's helpful.
No, and that's the ways in which those platforms are creating walls around them, and it's really damaging. I want to move on to something else which we're seeing all the time, which is when these social media platforms that we have today were built, creating artificial content using AI, making bots was hard and was slow. And now we have this world in which, with the new video models and the new creators and the ability to engage with stuff, and AI programs that are better than people at subreddit replies. What's happening to creators when we're going up against this sort of endless ability to direct AI created slop, endless ability to not understand who is real, not understand what is real, and what does that mean for authenticity?
Yeah, I think it's terrifying because nobody has any media literacy. So nobody can tell what's real and what's not, at least I would say, like broad swaths of the public. I do think a lot of stuff will be automated, like product review videos and these other things that I would say more like actors are going to be replaced. Creators, certainly it's going to have a devastating effect on the content creator industry in some areas, but also content creators have embraced AI so aggressively, and there is no group of people that is more pro AI than content creators, because I think they will embrace anything that can sort of ease the burden of creative labor. And so, and a lot of them want to make longer videos or create other creative work, and they just don't have the resources to. So I think they're all very, like, anytime you talk to a lot of content creators, like, they're very excited about AI, they're using AI, but it is like worrying kind of who's going to get a platform. I think that one good thing that YouTube did recently is say that, like, these AI generated faceless channels, like, we're going to demonetize a lot of them, and we're encouraging users to, like, we want to only monetize channels where there's like an actual person kind of behind it. At the same time, though, I will note, the same day that that went out, they had this whole module on their creator site encouraging creators to use VEO3 or whatever, their AI generated tool, whatever, image video generator. So I don't know. But I do think authenticity is just going to matter more than ever, because in a world of AI slop, it's like you really do end up looking to specific people that you trust for recommendations and trusted information, because you can't tell what's real and what's not elsewhere.
Yeah, I mean, I've even speculated whether or not AI is the relationship between AI and advertising is going to shift. That if you trust ChatGPT and Claude or these agents or the AI created content so much that when you go to make a buying decision, instead of going to AI, instead of going to find a person that recommended something, you'll trust the AI. And, will it undermine the entire ecosystem around which we have ad supported content?
I think it's definitely going to warp it. I don't know, though. I guess, I mean, in some ways, I mean, yeah, maybe it will decimate a lot of it. Um, I don't know. I just like wonder how these tools will eventually kind of play out, because I feel like we're in such early days, and so many of these tools are defined by like the decisions that some people, the executives make, like corporate power jockeying, like all of this stuff. And so I feel like we're in this like exploratory phase where there's all these tools. Obviously, OpenAI is like booming, but we haven't like AI has not become as proliferated outside of like average users are not using it as much as social media yet. They use ChatGPT a lot. I'm not arguing that, but like it's the fastest adopted product or whatever in the world. But I just think AI generally, we're still in the early days, and so I just don't know what it's gonna.
I mean, I remember the first time I saw Twitter mentioned in a newspaper, and I was blown away. And I was like, oh my God, our little thing is being covered. And like, isn't this cool? And then a decade later, I went to Cuba for a vacation for 2 weeks. And it was the first time that I had gone 2 weeks without seeing the Twitter logo
Oh my God.
mentioned. And I went into some hotel and they had CNN in Cuba on there. And of course, there were the tweets and everything else. And I was like, how is it this thing went from a bunch of us sitting in this room, in South Park in San Francisco, hanging out saying we should do this thing, to everybody in the world talking about it all the time? And that is the most surreal aspect of all of this, is the way in which sometimes some of these platforms and the technology and social media can become so ubiquitous.
Yeah, completely. I also think it's interesting to see this new class of Silicon Valley founders that are very young, and they've really grown up just completely immersed in the attention economy. And they are super nihilist as well, where they're sort of like building these tools and products where they just kind of want to be as extreme as possible. Like, it's very much like the Cluely effect. I don't know if you know Cluely. Cluely is this AI startup in San Francisco that essentially provides us like AI like layer to your computer that helps you take notes, helps you. I think their tagline is "cheat on everything." The founder was expelled from Columbia for using AI, I believe, to like cheat on tests, and now he basically just wants to help everyone cheat in the world. It's essentially like a marketing strategy for just another AI that I mean, sort of assistant type tool. But it's gotten a lot of hype because the founder is like leaned into this like cheat on everything, YOLO, go viral sort of mentality. There's so many founders that have sort of followed this like Cluely ethos. I need to write about this, I think, where they're like, okay, my product needs to be viral. It needs to be culturally relevant. I need to sort of like get it on the into like the zeitgeist, and that's my path to success. And because if I get something viral enough, it'll be inherently successful enough, and I just need people to talk about it. And I think some founders are doing kind of like really fucked up like dystopian stuff just to go viral almost because they don't mind like leaning into being a villain, you know, a tech villain or whatever, because they just want that virality. And it's funny because
Any
I think
press
like
is good press. Yeah.
exactly. And they're correct, by the way. Like, I think Roy is correct on everything that he believes about the attention economy, unfortunately. But I don't think that like the old Silicon, like the Twitters or of the world or whatever, like they weren't approaching their products in that way. They weren't thinking about, as far as I understand, like the attention economy hadn't pervaded everything. So I don't think there was that like intent to be on the news every single day, you know?
No, no. And in fact, at the time, the whole sort of era of the Web 2.0 companies, we didn't talk about influencers at all. We didn't talk about that. Like the entire idea was that it was about community building, and you would build a community. If you read like Seth Godin's books from that era, it was all about community building and the idea that it was a relationship building and you were constructing a community. And when it became the community is there around algorithms, but it became so that you disconnected it. You know, it wasn't my community. It was this way in which I have learned how to use the algorithms to bring people together. And it is a community around these different topics. But we lose that identity. You know, the Cluely guys, they hire influencers and engineers. They like said those are the only two things they're hiring in their company. And that's like it works and it's bonkers.
I think it's so fascinating because it's the Silicon Valley people have never understood media very well, especially the VCs. They're always trying to like whatever Andreessen is like, we're reinventing media, you know, and they make like a website or something like, I don't know. They never seem to really understand the internet. But I do believe that these younger founders of the Cluely, like the Cluely and the sort of like Cluely universe of copycat type founders, like they just, they're completely intertwined with the internet. And that's kind of, I don't know. I don't know how that's going to turn out. Like for them, I think I think they're correct that, and they're good. They're able to like wield attention in certain ways, but like I said, there's like this nihilism to it that I also think wasn't there, and mostly because of the previous generations of tech founders, I think there was more like optimism.
Yeah, no, there was incredibly optimistic. Sometimes I get accused of being too painfully optimistic because I see all the positive parts of it, everything else, and I realize that there are negative parts. But there is a way in which Silicon Valley culture discovers things as if it didn't exist at
It
all.
drives me
You know,
insane.
it's like, oh my God, have you thought of this idea that we can study science and technology and like its history and impact on society? And you're just like, yeah, it's called science and technology studies and it's been around for like 90 years and you like there are generations of PhDs and programs in this stuff. You can go read it. It's available on your internet if you wanted to look it up. And yet people don't, there's this idea that if you have this magical, powerful technology tool and this unlimited set of resources behind it once it gets going, that by definition you must know what you're doing. You must have deserved this success. You must be brilliant. And therefore, any idea you have in any field is brilliant. And it's so painfully wrong.
Yeah, it's delusional. It's so wrong. That's one thing I'm kind of glad that these billionaires are like posting online more, because I do think that it's like lifted the veil where people are like, "Oh my God, okay, you don't actually know what you're talking about." Um, but yeah, I mean, there's just so much hubris, and I think that's also like who gets to be a Silicon Valley VC. It's a lot of um people. I mean, like there are some humble, amazing, brilliant VCs, but there's a lot of VCs that just sort of like, you know, they just hype each other up and they're delusional, and they don't really they don't have like critical thinking skills, and they just kind of like fund people that look like them, and they're not that curious about the world. And I don't think they're very forward thinking or interested in learning and things, and so they just approach everything with a lot of hubris.
Sure, and they fund the same set of Ivy League and MIT and Stanford dropouts that they were over and over again, and it turns out that if you provide lots and lots of people with effectively unlimited resources, that some of them will become massively successful, and then you think you deserved it.
Exactly. And then we end up with these people like Mark Andreessen who suck.
Yeah.
Bummer.
Part of the reason I'm starting this podcast is I feel like a lot of these folks will talk to me, and I've been around on the inside, everything else, and I got very, very frustrated at the idea that everybody in tech or everybody in Silicon Valley or everybody who's building these social media platforms has these kind of right-wing libertarian views. And I don't think that's the reality. Like, I think the vast majority of people who work in these things are socially progressive. And we exist in this system, and we exist in the system of capitalism and markets and rewards and everything else. And a few people who end up very wealthy and very powerful end up adopting, their Ayn Rand high school libertarian meets authoritarianism ideology to feel comfortable with it, to justify their position. And I'm hoping that we can have a dialogue, which it's not all that.
Yeah, I don't think they're libertarian even at all. I think
They
that
call themselves libertarian, but
they
they're
call
not.
themselves that. I have like, I mean, I am friendly with a bunch of people at Reason magazine, a great libertarian magazine. They constantly are making this argument of like they want authoritarianism, they want tech authoritarianism, and this idea of libertarianism is nonsense, because they want more centralized power than anyone else. They just want to be the ones wielding it. Um, and yeah, I don't know, when you talk about like the ideology of the workers and stuff, I do think that people as a whole in like Northern California, in San Francisco area, are getting more reactionary. Like I think average workers at some of these companies, and maybe that's because it's like self-selecting, like who's going to work for Meta in like 2025, and like what value system do you have if you're doing that, or working with these companies that are working with ICE or something like. I don't know. I feel, and maybe this is also just the political moment where we're in under Trump, but like it does feel like a lot of them are embracing more authoritarian belief systems.
Yeah, in 2020, everyone was embracing diversity, equity, inclusion, Black Lives Matter, feminism, and a bunch of other things like that. And then the politics shifted, and now the loud voices are really scary and right wing, and I think that that's attracting more people into the space, and I think it's very dangerous.
And the whole Silicon Valley pivot to defense tech, where you have Sequoia and these big other firms, obviously Andreessen Horowitz as well, like all these other big firms, like getting further and further like into the defense industry, has been not great.
I think it's very dangerous, and I think that we need to say more clearly that the tools we build can be used for authoritarianism. They can be used for war. They can be used for terrible things. Therefore, we should not build those tools.
Yeah. And not seek to profit off them, and not, I mean, I do believe, like, I'm definitely a tech optimist, and I also, I probably am delusionally optimistic, and I believe in a better world through technology. I hate this like anti-tech sentiment that I think we're seeing grow, because I think like rightfully people are sort of reacting to our current tech landscape, but I don't think like we should abolish technology or like go back into the landscape of the 90s or something. But we also we need a more accountable tech ecosystem. And yeah, ideally people like that would face social pressure to not make those decisions. But unfortunately, that's gone out the window. It's a bummer.
When you look at creators, you look at users, you look at the ecosystem of social media, what kind of rights, what kind of basic expectations do you think people should be hoping for, demanding, expecting? What is important as we build new systems for this community?
Yeah, privacy, data privacy, um, autonomy over your online identity, um, the ability to like port your audiences over, like cross promote yourself, like I guess like be able to build a living online. I mean, obviously, like most of what I care about right now is free expression online and like data privacy and stuff like that. But in terms of content creators, like I think that a lot more of them would also love more transparency. I mean, all of us actually would love more transparency from these tech companies. I think we don't get a lot of transparency for them, even in terms of like moderation. And this is what the right has also complained about. But I think like explaining why people are banned, why you're getting down, like just having more visibility into systems that you can sort of successfully navigate these platforms in a way. Right now, they're such black boxes. So yeah, more transparency, autonomy, and privacy, and free speech.
It's crazy because in our offline world, we wouldn't accept a world where you couldn't know what the laws were, or you didn't know who the judge was, or you all of a sudden you've been fined or put in jail, and no one can tell you what you did. You don't know what the laws are. You don't know what you did. Everything else, except that we accept that in our digital platforms, where you're losing access to your livelihood, you're losing access to your friends, you're losing access to your content, all these crazy things, and we shouldn't accept that world.
I totally agree.
One last thing, I'm curious. You have experienced a lot of harassment and a lot of abuse and a lot of stalking and hate campaigns and things like that. I'm wondering if you could talk about that. I mean, for me, from the perspective internally, like in the early days of Twitter, there was this sort of idea, well, it isn't happening. And, it isn't happening because the two women that worked at the company, one quit, said that it was a boys' club and she was sick of it. And the other, Crystal, who built up all of the trust and safety things and hired the second most number of people in the company was never like valued in her voice. And so I'm wondering if you could talk about what that experience is and what should be done with it and what can be done with it, because it's so central to how especially women and queer people experience social media.
100%. And it goes back to free expression. I don't think you can, I mean, I think you need to, when you build spaces for free expression on the internet, you need to also recognize the dynamics and how these platforms and systems can be weaponized to silence speech and expression from women, from people of color, from queer people, et cetera. And so it really, really bothers me when these people are like, oh, so you think that we should have, censorship because you got cyberbullied or something? Like, that's crazy. I'm not even against permabans and stuff. Like, so don't even, it's not true. But I've always said that I think that users deserve more control over their online experience, because I have a very high tolerance for that stuff. I cover YouTubers for a living. Like, every way that the internet has been, could be weaponized against me, I think I've had it weaponized against me, and I'm always in some sort of internet drama. And that's fine. Like, that's, it's not fine. It sucks, but it's like, but I accept a certain amount of that because of my job. And I think that we should give users decisions over how much they want to experience, like the ability to limit replies. That should have been there from the jump. We should still have the ability to turn off quote tweets on Twitter, things like that. I think there's been more privacy features that have been built in, but just like giving users like more ability to control their own experience. And if that hate and harassment is happening, not have it affect them. like even just I have like my notifications set to mutuals only, I think on most platforms. And like there are so many times where someone's like, oh my God, I'm so sorry for the hate that you're getting or something. And I don't even see it because I don't, it's not coming into my online world because of the privacy settings that I've been able to have. So I think that obviously we need top down trust and safety at some of these platforms to ensure that there's not like overt wrongdoing, right? Like where you're tweeting out like dangerous info or something. I don't know. But I do have I always tell people like, I would protect people's rights to sort of say negative things about me if that's how they believe or that's what they want to speak about. I just want to have the ability for me to express myself online too and not be inundated and not have an online experience where I feel like I can't have a voice because it's so drowned out by these other people, if that makes sense.
No, that absolutely makes sense. I think that this idea of Mark and I are in these group chats, and he was the Twitter lawyer who said the free speech wing of the free speech party. And the reality we discovered is that there is no way to be an absolutist on free speech.
Oh, you can't. There's no such thing. If you understand
what happens. Yeah.
I just want to say that there's no such thing. And anybody that says I'm a free speech absolutist, Mike Masnick had a good comment about this recently. I'm going to butcher it, but like you are silly because you all draw the line somewhere, and that's fine. I have a very like permissive view of speech. Like I want as much discourse as possible. I think when you start to restrict speech too much, you ultimately affect news content. I give this example on Threads, for instance. Like I was, suspended very shortly after I joined Threads for talking about revenge porn, which of course had the word porn and flags internal moderation systems, whatever. Like we want to protect people, but we don't want to end up creating these systems where you're scared to say the wrong word because you might get banned or something. Like, so I want a permissive structure for speech. There needs to be some sort of guardrails, of course, so that there's not blatantly like illegal stuff or like everyone's not just like doxing each other and it's kiwi farms or something. But I think that a lot of people that spend a lot of time online complaining about like harassment, which they're rightful to complain about, like I think that we could give them tools to have a better online experience. Like I said, I have a lot of systems set up where I don't even know that those people are yelling about me. And that's fine, right? Like that's a better solution to me than expecting the platform that I'm on to like go moderate all of those people, because most of what they're doing is not violative.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and if we build a system that massively restricts free speech, then it's going to be used to reinforce the power of the people who are most collected to power. Like it's not going to end up helping engage in positive social change. It ends up making things worse. And we do need to empower people. We need to give people tools. We need to give people a system by which they can defend and support themselves. And those need to be designed into the platforms and provided by the companies. But simply, we can't wish people off of these systems. And if we do that, if we build a system where banning is ubiquitous and it happens easily, then it's going to come around and get to us.
Exactly. And I think it's great to have like community. I do like the move towards like communities and people self-moderating. Like there are communities that are more permissive and there are communities that are more strict. And I think also the social norms on a platform really affect a lot. Like what sort of social norms are you cultivating on your platform when you're building it? Like Blue Sky, there are definitely like social norms on Blue Sky where the vibe is different than Twitter. And I think that affects how people speak and how people communicate with each other. So I think there are subtle ways to build healthier communities that is not just asking for more censorship. And what I really don't agree with is censorship of like quote unquote misinformation that I think we're seeing it weaponized right now, right? And we saw it weaponized under Biden as well, where like, the media is sort of calling for false information to get taken down. And I get it when you're talking about like election fraud, conspiracies, whatever. But what ultimately ends up happening when you push those systems is the government is censoring factual speech.
Yeah. There's no simple way to handle it. I have taken a lot of your time. I want to thank you very much. I want everyone to go read Taylor's book, Extremely Online, subscribe to User Mag, follow all of her videos and podcasts, everything else. there is no one that I have seen who has a better idea of what is going on with users on social media and the way in which the cultural trends are. So thank you so much for your work, and thank you so much for coming on my podcast.
Thanks for having me. This was so fun.